What is Unity Cloud and why do we need it? Before we talk about this, we need to briefly introduce one concept about version control systems in general. Version control systems can be distributed or centralized. At this point in the course, I think it's enough to understand that with a centralized system, there is one central place where your project is stored. The orange dot should represent this in my little graphic here. If you ever worked with SVN, then you worked with a centralized system, although it's probably not the most popular system anymore. In a distributed system, on the other hand, several copies of the project can be stored at different places, and there needs to be some mechanism how to sync them. Git is the famous example for a distributed system. One advantage of Plastic is that you can use it in both ways, or even as a combination of both. I don't want to go too deep on the distributed path now, because it really only gets relevant when you have several people in different places working together. For example, a company that has several offices in different countries and they need to efficiently work together on a project. Plastic is very versatile in that regard, but those solutions are self-managed. So you will need someone to set up the system or do it yourself. In our case, where we want to start learning Plastic or collaborate on a rather small project, it will almost always be easier to start with the centralized approach with Unity Cloud. So what is Unity Cloud? Unity Cloud does three major things for you. First, it is the place where your project or your code base is actually stored. Then it allows you to manage the project and the team working on it. That means you can assign roles, decide who has access, and so on. And finally, and this is definitely the reason why Unity is trying to push the cloud solution, is that you can integrate your project with most of the Unity services that are available. For example, imagine you want to use Unity's build automation service. That means you don't want to build your project locally, but through the cloud. Once you connected your project to Unity Cloud, it's automatically available for the build automation service. You don't have to download anything or import any files. The service has access to your project out of the box. So everything is connected, and in a lot of cases that makes things easier. Okay, I think that's enough context for Unity Cloud. Let's now sign in for the user we just created. We can search Google for Unity Cloud, and then on the homepage we could check Create Account. You can see that you could also create a new Unity ID, but we already have one, so we choose Sign in with the Unity instead. And just like that, we are redirected to our cloud dashboard. Depending on how much you traveled into the future, this might look slightly different for you, but the major points should remain the same. What you can immediately see here is that all the information is related to your organization. This is the default organization which was created with your Unity ID as we saw before. Now, the simplest way to learn about this stuff is by just creating a new project. But we need one more thing in order to connect this to Unity, and that is Unity DevOps. Remember when we were talking about all the services that Unity offers through the cloud? Unity DevOps is one of them. We can find those services under Products. Here you can see a very long list of services or products from Unity. A lot of them are rather small tools for special use cases. For example, there is a whole section here on multiplayer tools, which you might want to use in your game if you want to offer multiplayer support, and you don't want to write those things yourself. If you are interested, check out some of those tools. Depending on your use case, they can really save you a lot of time. But we are interested in the DevOps service, which we can find here pretty much at the top. Here you can find a ton of additional material and tutorials. And there are all sorts of terms which might be a bit overwhelming when you first touch this. What we should take away is that Unity DevOps gives us access to version control and build automation. Don't worry if you don't really understand a lot about build automation. We will get to it much later in the course. For now, we don't worry about all this other stuff. We might just quickly take a look at the pricing section, because technically this is not free. It has a free tier, and I promise everything that we will do in the course will be 100% inside that free tier, so you will not have to spend anything. We can see that the limitations for the free tier are the number of collaborators on a project. Up to 3 seats are free. Then those sections on build minutes regard the build pipelines, where we get 200 minutes per month for free on Windows. We talk about that later. And finally, we can store up to 5 GB of project files in the cloud. I guarantee you that no small project for learning and playing around will ever exceed those limits. I uploaded thousands of lines of code and all sorts of assets for my test users and never got close to those limits. You can also monitor your usage from the dashboard or the administration section, where you can find a billing overview. Okay, I think those issues had to be mentioned, but now let's actually start using this. Let's ignore this getting started section here in the middle, because for now it's more confusing than helpful. This is a sort of dashboard for the project, where we could inspect all sorts of details. You can see that once we unlocked the DevOps service, we now have the same organization at the side here as we saw with our Unity account. There's much more to discover, but I think we need to quickly connect all of that to an actual Unity project to convince you that this is actually useful. For that, we click on the organization, and now we can see an overview of our repositories. What are repositories? If you haven't heard the term yet, for now, just think about it as the place where our project is stored. Obviously, we don't see a repository yet because we haven't created one, so let's change that. Congratulations, we now have our first repository. However, this is not a Unity project yet, but we are very close. For now, this is an empty container with no files. In order to connect this to Unity, we need the Plastic client. If you have already installed Plastic, you can immediately click the blue button to open the desktop app. Otherwise, you can choose your installation here. I already installed it, so I click the blue button, and the browser asks me if I want to allow opening the Plastic app, which it then does. Now, if you installed Plastic for the first time, you will not see the same stuff that you see here. You will have an option to log in with your user. Unfortunately, you cannot really log out of Plastic. So in my case, I am still logged in with the user who was last using it, which is test user Andy, whom we already know from before. Please don't worry about all those options for now. We will talk about the Plastic app in depth later. I just want to log in with the same user we logged in on Unity Cloud. For that, I need to go to the top right here, then manage accounts, and now here we can log in with our user Cindy. A few clicks later, we can actually see the repository. The repository is still empty, so the last step we need is finally Unity. I open Unity Hub, which I would highly recommend you should use too, but I only use it at this moment to create a new project. So the situation is I now have a repository in the cloud and I have a local Unity project. The last step is to connect the two. We do that in the project settings under services. Remember, Unity DevOps is a service. Here we can choose our organization and our project in the cloud and just link the current Unity project to the cloud project. Now they are technically linked, but all the stuff regarding version control is happening through the Plastic app. The Plastic app is an intermediary between Unity and the cloud, which has all the tools that we will learn about in this course. And Plastic also needs to know about your project. It does this through something called a workspace. I know you have a lot of questions and I promise they will all be answered, but for now just stay with me and we will create a new workspace. Here we could create a new repository, but we know that we already have one waiting in the cloud. So let's just select it and the workspace name is fine. Now when we do that, at first glance it looks like nothing happened. But when we take a look at this change set option here, we can see that something was created. And this something is basically the initial Unity project, which is now under version control. Notice that by default, the assets folder is not part of that first change set. I can prove that to you when we go back to the Plastic client, where we now have a workspace under our cloud repository. You can see that the packages and project settings folders have green check marks, which means that they are part of the repository. The assets folder and therefore also the scene file are only available in our local workspace and not uploaded to the cloud yet. Therefore, they don't have the green check mark. If we go back to the cloud and reload the page, there we have the final step. Our initial Unity project, which means the packages folder and the project settings, are also visible here and therefore part of our cloud repository. Okay, was that quite a lot? I told you it's pretty complex at first glance. Let's take a deep breath and briefly recap what we just did.